Welcome to the Exponential Minds podcast. The research, development, launch, and growth of new technologies is creating incredible momentum in the modern world. Join futurist Nikolas Badminton as he talks with the innovators and the exponential minds that are tackling some of the biggest problems and creating solutions that are propelling humanity to the next level.
Hello and welcome to the Exponential Minds podcast. My name is Nikolas Badminton. I'm a futurist. I help my clients look out 5, 10 and 20 plus years so that people can build a more strategically planned, better future for all. And today I'm incredibly excited to, in our new episode of the podcast, to welcome Tracey Follows. Tracey is a professional futurist and she identifies future trends that will shape our world. Her clients have included Telefonica, Google, Sky, Farfetch, Conde Nast and Virgin. She's spoken at UNHQ in New York, delivered her TedX at the UK Foreign Commonwealth Office, and closed at events such as Think with Google. She writes her own contributor column in Forbes, and her opinions are regularly sought after by national media around the world. Tracey is also a member of the Association of Professional Futurists, World Future Studies Federation, and she's also a fellow of the RSA, which I've just become, so that's very exciting. Her first book, The Future of You, Can Your Identity Survive 21st Century Technology, which is published by Elliott Thompson and has just come out, is an exciting read that takes us from knowing you to destroying you and everything in between. And Tracey, welcome to the podcast. Finally, we talk.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Nick. That's such a generous intro. And I'm very flattered and privileged to be considered an exponential mind.
An exponential mind. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that, putting ourselves in a situation where we can challenge people to say, you know what, the world's going to move a lot faster than you think is exactly what we're here to do. And that's why I started the podcast like 5 years ago now. It's exciting to speak to you as well. Tracey, I would love to get a little bit of background, as I ask all our guests, as to how you became a futurist and what your journey was to that point and what motivated you to write your book, The Future of You.
It's interesting in that I've never had a plan for anything, which you can probably gather from the chaotic way in which the last sort of 20, 25 years have panned out for me. When I went to university, I studied philosophy. So clearly I didn't have a job in mind. I couldn't believe that you could go and kind of study space and time and sit around talking about it all day. So I thought, this is wonderful. I'll never get this opportunity again. So I did that. And I didn't go into another job. I actually stayed to do a master's in technology policy, which again, when I left, wasn't hugely useful. So it's kind of science and technology policy, but now it is incredibly useful. And all the way in between, I went into advertising and marketing. That's where I ended up, as an account man in agencies and then as a client, always for tech brands, actually, kind of T-Mobile, BT, one-to-one, always for sort of telco and tech brands and retail, actually, always interested in retail. And ended up as CSO at JWT and was, still in the marketing and advertising world, really, but back agency side. And it was then when I was starting to develop this idea that, hang on a minute, by the time clients have delved around and investigated and identified an insight, by the time they've actually actioned it, it's far too late. So I was already thinking about foresight, and I actually took the market intelligence department in JWT and turned it from market intelligence into planning foresight and reinvented that. And I was just getting more into it. I was always doing trends and innovation and decided, actually, I think from what I'm reading, you can do this as a full-time job. So
right.
It was a bit like when I was studying philosophy. I can't believe you can sit around and talk about space and time. I can't believe that you can spend your time with people, with innovators and looking at trends and researching and talking to people about the future 30 years hence. And of course you can. And I found the community and I ended up going to the University of Houston and doing their course there and getting involved in the futurist community like you probably, Nick, and leaving my job and setting up a company full time. And it's just the best thing I ever did. And like all things that work out like that, you think, gosh, I wish I'd done it earlier.
But you can't do it earlier.
Exactly.
Right? You have to have the building blocks is the struggles that you've come before. I don't subscribe to the idea of you've got to have battle scars. And you know what? We've all got battle scars. I would have preferred to have not had the near nervous breakdowns I had delivering tech projects or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Yeah. I think futures and foresight study is additive to the things that we've done before. Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a bit like when Plato's saying you can't be a philosopher king until you're at least 50 years old, or a philosopher queen actually. But it's a bit like futuring. Yes, of course you can do it when you're younger, but I wonder whether it is when you're older and you've accumulated enough experience in different areas and known lots of different collaborators that maybe you get the most out of it, both for yourself and your clients, because you've connected a lot of dots along the way.
And it's collecting the things so that you don't repeat mistakes as well, right, along the way. I mean, I think that more than anything else, when you're an advisor like yourself, people hire you so that they don't screw up, right? They ping people in to speak so that they can learn things quickly and easily because the ground has been trodden on, right? It's the way.
It's interesting because when I did start up, I mean, obviously, probably like yourself, I don't know, but most of my clients, or the people that came to me, were people who I'd worked with for years or years before, years ago. So there were people that you already had a trusting relationship with. You tell them the truth, they would know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and that's how it all started, really. So particularly with the piece with Virgin and Google, there were people I'd worked with before in advertising and marketing, and then very quickly you move on to other things and broaden out your client base, I suppose. But I was always forever grateful for those kind of founding clients like Telefonica who, took me in and gave me a chance to work on projects with them.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. Like Telefonica, I started in telecoms billing years and years and years ago, like 20 plus years ago. And, working in telecommunications and high tech, and companies like Virgin and their approach to running their business, right? I mean, Richard Branson isn't in every business all over. No, he delegates, he's built a community of his people. They love it. I did some work with Virgin Holidays in Crawley, beautiful place in the south of England. And the CEO was brilliant. And do you know who's the best person to run a holidays company? Someone that used to basically be a rep at a resort, and she didn't have a computer, and she did it all by phone and on paper, and she ran an incredibly successful business. And you start seeing this and collecting these stories of these companies, and it's like, this techno-utopian sort of fetishistic approach of like implement these systems and the world will be great, are kind of all shattered by the fact that at the center is this soft, squishy, gooey humanness. That's important.
It's interesting you say that, because I suppose I've always ended up working with people, being part of teams people that are pretty entrepreneurial. They can see the opportunities on the horizon, and they are looking for some help in terms of how do you turn those possibilities and opportunities into something more concrete? And I think lots of those companies you're referring to, and the ones I am, that they are entrepreneurial. They can see those opportunities, those emerging markets and new consumer values and need states opening up.
And they can move quickly as well. I mean, like, I'm sure you've worked with a number of companies in the last year, companies that are willing to move quickly, invest, know that it's tough times, and knowing that there's going to be a new world out the back of it, one way or the other, right?
Yeah, well, there's plan A, now there's plan B, then there's plan C, and now there's plan D. I mean, talk about scenarios.
And then there's plan X, which never existed before, and then suddenly, the world changes. So let's get into your book. Because I read through this book and there's lots of good stuff in there. You're quite provocative throughout the book, getting people to think about things, right? I mean, this is very much like there's technology and there's humanity, there's identity, but you're pretty progressive in terms of how you're talking about identity in there, right? I mean, identity is actually a huge field these days, with like the ascension of social media and the prevalence of what people are seeing as the surveillance state, whether that's government sponsored or corporate sponsored, right? Where are we today with our identities? What is the human identity in 2021?
That is, I think it's quite fractured, and I think you'll see from the beginning of the book, anyone who picks it up, that I talk about it as distributed identity or a distributed you. That's how I start off, even before the first chapter, that our identities are fragmented, decentralized, distributed in lots of different places. And so really, I think one of the conclusions to jump to the conclusions is that when you look around at the debates that are happening now on identity, they seem to be a bit stuck in the past, I think, and they're still circulating around the question of authenticity. You know, what is the authentic self? Okay, that is a very interesting and important philosophical problem or debate. But more interesting to me is, what is the integrity of the self? How do we manage and control and keep ourselves together when the self is literally distributed across the World Wide Web and isn't necessarily 100% in our control? Now, maybe it's never been 100% in our control, even in the analog world, but it makes it, in a connected or interconnected world, much more difficult to navigate. Like everything, it's a complex system now. So what does that mean for how we approach it? So that's one of the things I'm looking at in the book. And you're right in terms of provoking people, because I thought long and hard and discussed with the publishers about what the title underneath the future of you should be. And I was quite keen for it to be a question. I didn't want it to be a statement, because I want people to think about the possible potential futures, you know, and where we're going and where we could go. So can your identity survive 21st century technology? Question mark. Was really important to me, that it was an invitation to get this debate going and for individuals to think about their own personal identity in their own individual lives.
Yeah, and you know, I think that people are thinking about that. I just did a TV interview last Friday, and it was about workplace surveillance. And one of the things I sort of ended with was like, I think that if a company's considering this, I think they should consider like turning the camera on themselves and considering who they are. And oftentimes, I mean, your whole book is coming back to your identity, and then you sort of feed in ideas for you to think about what your identity is. And we're almost in a world that sort of lost identity in a way, right? I read a really interesting article the other day, and it was talking about the loss of context and time.
Yes,
we've got access to everything. We've got access to all the music, all the videos, all the movies, all the books in the world. We've got access to all the great minds to share their thoughts, whether it's through podcasts, whether it's through video and whatever. And back in the day, you'd have to go to a library, you'd have to rent a film, you'd have to do whatever. And there was sort of a longer, slower consideration of the information that we're bringing in. And now it's like a fire hose of information. And it's almost like the fire hose is stripping away what our identity is, and we've just become consumers, right?
Yes, that's a good insight. I mean, I think in the past, our identity would be anchored, if you like. It would be anchored in the nation state or a local community, your profession or your job, and also maybe a legal identity, whatever papers you had, like your birth certificate or your wedding certificate or something. And that was it, really. And now, increasingly, it's like we're in the digital virtual worlds as well as the analog world. And literally, you can create, shape, and explore any identity you like. You can have many alternative identities. And I think what's happening is, like with so many things, the reality and the narrative are completely decoupled now. So it doesn't really matter what the reality is sitting behind something. As long as the narrative is coherent, it's almost like the correspondence theory of truth doesn't really apply anymore. It's just the coherence theory of truth. As long as it all hangs together and it feels interesting and engaging, it's pretty appealing to people. So that is interesting when you're in the virtual world. When you come back out into the real world, you're a little bit confused probably about your identity and where the boundaries are, and how connected or not you should be. I mean, literally, when I was even 2 or 3 years ago, first researching sort of virtual reality with some Gen Z, I suppose you can call them consumers if you like, or users, one of the biggest outputs or learnings was they were saying, well, it's an immersive environment. I'm quite worried. How do I get out? How do I switch it off? And I think that is really one of the questions for just our everyday lives now. You know, everything's coming at us, like you say. It's an incredibly mediated environment. Everything's interconnected. How do I switch it off? I'm not sure there's an answer.
No, absolutely. And I mean, you talk about transhumanism in the book, and like we've become technology, and technology has become us away. You know, and you talk about Roy Amara's law, right? The Amara's law, you know, in the short term, we overestimate the impact of technology, right? And it's like, oh, you know, here comes the futurist with their big ideas on the future. But in the long term, we desperately underestimate the impact of technology. But it kind of seems like the gap between the overestimation and the underestimation is getting smaller, right? It seems like you can overestimate, and then 2 years later, it's like, whoa, everyone's buying electric cars, or whoa, you know, Tesla's deployed self-driving to 700,000 vehicles. Whoa, you know, and it's sort of become really interesting. But how does identity actually transcend that sort of transhumanist approach of we've become the technology?
I don't know whether it does, actually. So one of the conclusions is, I do a little equation, which is, you know, the self is now, you know, my psychology plus my biology divided by my technology. In that, technology is really inherently part of the self now. So it isn't an external thing sitting on a smartphone, a device that you can hold in your hand. It literally is, I guess, you know, a disappearable in your body, an ingestible, an implant. Oh, well, I interviewed you for that, right? For the book. And we talk about that in the book. So really, it is part and parcel of the self now. And one of the provocations is, well, what does that mean then? Because literally technology could be dividing the self. It could be dividing the self, the sense of self you have as an individual. We talk about that a lot in the book, but also there's also a context question. Could it be dividing society? Because there is that age-old question of not everybody will be able to afford or find some of this technology accessible. So what kind of species can we imagine in the future? Is it one where we have created new tribes and new divisions? And actually we might have a more coherent sense of an identity, but a less coherent society. I don't know, you know, these are some of the implications that, as you say, these are further out, but they should be explored now so we can work back and make the right decisions that we need to today.
I kind of think technology and humanity have kind of gone hand in hand for a long, long time, right? Once 10,000 years ago, we started to form into settlements. So someone had to, you know, do agriculture. Build the fire, do the agriculture. And, you know, even in the UK, we both grew up in the UK. If you think about when we were growing up, you know, how much were you identified by, you know, the tool that you held in your hand? Oh, they're an engineer, you know, they're a farmer, they're a laborer, oh, they're an accountant, oh, you're a computer technician. And then everyone thinks that you're a computer technician, even though you do a million different things, right? So suddenly, you know, we do have these tools and we do have these things. And this idea of the identity as what you call it, a polymorphic code, is super interesting, right? But that code could operates as an algorithm that changes on a day-to-day basis, right?
So I thought about this idea of the polymorphic code. I put it in at the end of the book, and then I took it out again, and then the editor questioned it, and I went, do you know what, after thinking about it, I'm putting it back in. It's the original thought, actually. Right. But I did ponder it a while, because I was thinking, does it make sense to people? The thing I was trying to express was that we are living through these different portals and these different nodes of this networked community. So even though we might have a very integrated self sitting at my desk like this in the physical real world, I want to arrive somewhere in the virtual world as a coherent self, but I might go through different routes. So the idea of a polymorphic code is that you can kind of send out your identity, but using different channels and connecting different elements together. But when you end up at your destination, you'll still be the coherent self you were. So it's like you could go, polymorphic code is like, it could be the algorithm can change. It could be 3 + 3 = 6, or it could be 8 - 2 = 6. It doesn't really matter the route you take. It's can you still arrive at your destination as an integrated entity?
So when we go through these machinations and thinking about, whether it's polymorphic codes and ourselves as algorithmic sort of functions in a way, which is actually deeply humanistic in a way, because, you'd eat some food, you feel a certain way, you listen to music, you feel a certain way, you have a conversation, you feel a certain way and whatever. How do we protect our identities in the 21st century? I mean, just prior to, me hitting the record button, you were saying, oh, I got rid of my television and it's been a savior during the past year or so, right? How do we go about, what are like the 2 or 3 things that you'd advise people that are listening to this to do to preserve their identity in this new world, even though we're being hit by content and technology?
That's an interesting, no one's asked me that question yet. That's interesting. But I think I'll take some inspiration from looking at, as I do in the book, the otaku from Japan and that sort of manga anime world. And what they do, of course, is they understand the self as character and as a complex set of characteristics. And I just wonder if we should stop thinking, of course we want an integrated self to some extent, but we should stop thinking of it as the big blob, the self, and it's all of the characteristics, the mo elements that connect different ways through different pathways to make up the you. So for me, when you were talking about me getting rid of my telly, I could feel that I was being manipulated through rolling news, mainstream media, bodies piling up in hospital. And over the time, I was thinking, this isn't what I want to see, but also it's not giving a fair reflection of everything else I'm experiencing in life and what my family is telling me, or friends, or in different locations. And I actually got rid of the telly, and I haven't watched rolling news since, well, probably like around about May, June at all. And I think that saved my sanity, because I then sought out the kinds of information and the different viewpoints and opinions that I wanted to. And it was long form content, or it was, I get the FT delivered every day. I didn't want to sit in front of the flickering rolling news that was showing me a movie that I wasn't really sure was the movie I wanted to see, or even the movie that related to reality. And it's the same with digital identity, for example. So there's the big debate about vaccine certificates right now and health passporting. Rather than listening just to a mass mainstream message, which is very polarized, it's either you're anti-vax or you're pro this sort of, surveillance state, papers, please. Actually, somewhere in the middle, there's a very practical option about using your smartphone to download some decentralized, digital identity apps and take control of your own life. And so these are some of the things I think we should be doing our own research, speaking to people that we seek out, and not necessarily relying on the sound bites, the kind of snackable content, if you like, that's not going to ever give you the full story.
Yeah, it's like the idea of digital dignity, right? That Jaron Lanier and people like that talk about. It's like, well, if you've got a smartphone that's collecting data and you go about your daily life, at the end of the day, you've bled data, you've got all of this information, then you deserve to own it. And then you deserve to know how that's being used and applied and whatever. I know Microsoft are looking to, explore this idea. The
network. They want to build a network, don't they? Like what do you call it? It's not just the individual apps. They want to connect it all up, so they own that kind of layer.
Right.
I don't want them to do that.
I just read today, Microsoft may be in the game to buy Dispo, which is like, gamer conversations and whatever, because, owning the Xbox isn't enough. You need to know the context and whatever. And then suddenly we can connect with people and we can sell them more stuff. And, I've done work with Microsoft before. They're actually a fantastic company.
Oh, yeah. I know it.
The first company I sat in a room with a very senior, like the most senior consumer, a business marketing person I think I ever sat in a room with, like $3 billion budget or something like that. And, the amount of money they were just spending to switch opinion and shift opinion. And it's actually interesting. You get to 2021, the whole world is just about shifting opinion a little bit. And if you can just dial it a little bit this way and dial it a little bit that way, you can ultimately shift the identity of the people that want to use your products or use your competitors' products. So you ultimately influence their identity in a way. I mean, you talk about influencers. That's guns for hire. You talk about advocates, and in advertising, as you know this, oh yeah, let's create 1 million advocates. It's like, no one cares about your brand that much. No one. Yes, there might be people that are excited about Nike or Tesla, but you know what? They don't go home and eat, make like Tesla pizza pockets.
No, but that's why they've had to invent computer-generated ones, so that you can sell in the brand you like, and then you've got the avatar influencer that you like, and oh, what a beautiful marriage, and somehow you can monetize that, and circumvent reality altogether.
We're in a weird world. Oh, we could talk about this for about 8 hours, but people that share pictures of their newborn children on Twitter is I think probably the lowest rung of modern identity management in the world, which is I'm now a parent, I must share this with the world. Here's a picture of my child that's 3 days old, maybe even less, maybe even hours old. Now Twitter owns a picture of my child at 4 hours old, and suddenly I've given my child away to the techno gods.
I think that's a really interesting point, because it's before the child is born. It's the scan of the fetus. It literally is. And I talk about this in the book. There's some fascinating academic work on this, which is literally, when does the identity, and when is the first selfie? And I was like, well, the first selfie, bizarrely, isn't taken by you these days. It's taken before you're even born. It's the scan that comes back from the hospital. And then you get the parents talking about, oh, it looks like him, it looks like her, literally giving it a separate identity, even though it is not yet physically separate. And the UK Children's Commissioner in the UK did a report a couple of years ago which showed that by the age of 13, the average child has had 1,300 images of themselves sent all over the internet, videos, photos, whatever, by their own parents. And one has to wonder what on earth that is about, and where the payoff is, because it isn't surely in the interests of the child.
So I've got a 7.5-month-old kid. I don't share that information. If people want to see a picture, I get them to send me, their phone number. I send them something through Signal or something like that, right? And I was on a phone conversation. I was like, yeah, we're really happy. This is with my parents. Really happy that no one's sharing pictures of Maxie online. And my dad looked very sheepishly down at the monitor. And he goes, yeah, maybe except that one time on Facebook. And I was like, oh my God. So, and that's it. But your identity is distributed. My identity is my father's identity. My son's identity is all of our identities, that live on in perpetuity.
Which is one of the reasons that it makes it so understandable that people, or teens, young people more so, but not exclusively, leap into these virtual games and these environments to explore their own identity. And one of the other things I found was that the reason for that is that the weight of expectations in the real world from other people forcing an identity on them, whether it's their parents or teachers or whatever it might be, the pressure these days on that generation to fulfill the potential of the identity that seems to have been almost created for them in the real world is too much. And they go into these virtual worlds, and it's a great release. There's no rules. You can be who you want. You can be a completely different person, and you can explore alternative identities. And I think that's a really interesting trend. And I do wonder a lot of the time about where that's going to take us in the future.
Yeah, I think there's a liberation in there as well. And, there's a lot of people out there talking about ableist futures and queer futures and, trans, and we've got family members that are going through transition, right? A whole bunch of different things. And it's enabled because people can truly be who they want to be. I mean, we both grew up in the UK, and the conversation is as a male in the UK is what football team do you support? Is that. Is that identity thing that's historical. And it's well, my dad played professional football, and I don't like football, soccer for people listening to this that aren't from the UK. And it's but yeah, are you a Manchester United supporter? Are you a Liverpool supporter? And it's and it's deep cultural identities in groups of people, the idea of de-individuation, the idea of an anonymity. I don't know. It's a deep subject. So in your book, it's knowing you, watching you, creating you, connecting you, replacing you, enhancing you, destroying you, and we've touched on a bunch of these things. We can probably talk about this forever. And I think I want to invite you back at some point, because I think we should talk about the future of advertising and marketing, because we got into that before this
conversation. You think there is one?
Oh, well, discuss, right?
Discuss.
But, if you're listening to this, go out and buy the book. It's fantastic. The Future of You, Can Your Identity Survive the 21st Century Technology? Follow Tracey on Twitter. Opinions, like insights, arguments, questions. I enjoy following you on Twitter and interacting, and it's taken me a while. I've been hassling you for a long time to come on the podcast. I'm glad we waited until now. I could read your book and go into it. Where else can people find out a little bit more about you, Tracey?
I'm on Twitter at Tracey Futures. I'm on LinkedIn. You can always connect with me there. I'm just starting a new sort of Future of You website and blog where I can catalogue lots of ideas and stimulus that people might have about the future of you and their own identity, and we'll try and capture some of that in video format and put it on there. So we'll create future of you, turn it into a property, I think, and start to explore this and get the debate going. So this is a great start to that, and thank you, Nick.
No, thank you so much for your time, Tracey. Everyone go and check that out. Subscribe to the Exponential Minds podcast. We're everywhere, so you can find us on your platform du jour, wherever you want to be. And Tracey, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much, Nick.